Hey, welcome everybody to the Wired for Growth podcast brought to you by Winona IT. Thanks for joining us today. Today's topic, a really interesting topic. We're going to be talking about work-life balance. We've got Scott Naveen here with us. Scott works at Winona IT as our director of company culture, and we have a guest speaker today, Dustin. Dustin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Dustin Geoglein. I'm the founder and chief consultant at Caliber Consulting. So for about the last 4 to 5 years, I've been working with many different businesses, well over 100 at this point, really focusing entirely around the employee experience. So conversations like work-life balance, supervisor effectiveness, helping them solve retention issues and holding on to their A players. Pretty much anything that revolves around culture and people are conversations that I've been getting to have. So recently connected with you two, excited to be here and talk about this today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Where can people find out a little bit more about your business, your consulting?
Thank you. So we have a website, caliberconsulting.org. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Dustin Geoglein. The name spelling will probably be.
We'll throw it up on the screen. So today's topic, Scott, we've talked about this for years now, I feel like. And when you think of work-life balance, where can people start their understanding of this?
Yeah, it's a broad topic for sure. I think what comes to mind for me is thinking about like what a person is setting out for their purpose in life and where they're finding their value. I think the word balance it can be a little misleading at times because there's just different demands. Sometimes the home front, things go crazy and you have to, apply a little more focus and effort there. And then there's other times, certainly the workplace needs more of you and things. So I think a lot of it for me anyway has really come down to where I'm finding my meaning and purpose.
And where would you guys kind of define even work-life balance? What's the elevator pitch to someone asking, what is that?
I guess in my perspective, we're not two separate selves, right? We're individual whole beings, and we don't, even if we try, we can't fully hang up our work hat when we get home, and we can't fully hang up our home hat when we get to work. And so knowing that we are that whole person, and that there are finite resources like time and energy and stress levels, I guess to me, it's just having an understanding from the professional and personal angle that we are one person and that we have to keep the right boundaries and things in check to maintain sanity and success in both realms of our life.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right, Scott, I'm putting you on the seat. How do we do as an organization overall with this topic?
Yeah, I think, we have our challenges like any young, growing company. We certainly strive, I think, to set some decent lanes for people to run in. And I would say on the whole, for a company our size and the demands that we have, I think we do, honestly, a pretty good job. People run hard when they're at work, but, most people are able to keep some pretty good boundaries and get home at a decent hour.
How have you seen it? You've been in the market, I'll say 2 or 3 more years than me on this. How have you seen it really change over your time in the workplace?
Yeah, I would say, definitely the shift has been from companies being able to kind of demand and say, hey, this is how it is if you want to work here.
Sure.
To now, I think employees have a lot more leverage.
What's really behind a lot of that shift? Because I agree, when I think kind of stereotypically of what it used to be like or what I'm told it used to be like, I think of it wasn't really a topic that was even discussed nearly as much as it is today. What's made that shift in your mind?
I think there's some complex factors. Certainly, it was already happening, I think, pre-COVID, but that, I think just put a whole new level of demands, honestly, that the employee could make with so many people being, pushed to work from home. And then some companies were like, all right, we have all this office space we're paying for. We want people back in the office. And people are going, time out.
Yeah.
This actually worked for us for 6 months, a year. You can't tell me that the company can't continue on because we just did.
Sure.
So it was kind of a game changer.
Dustin, you're more in the analytics. I guess we kind of have more of a subjective view. Does the analytics kind of back up what Scott's talking about here?
100%. I mean, talking even about COVID, when a company decides to go remote or hybrid, and that's an option, they have increased their talent pool infinitely. basically, right? And as an employee seeking employment, if I know I have options outside of the geographical ring, I used to have to think, it's like, how far am I willing to drive to get a job? Now it's like, well, that's not a factor anymore. So more people have access to more employers, and those employees are looking for the best of the best, which means they're going to offer the best of the best. And so I think that again, I think the hybrid remote thing is the biggest variable I've seen shift in the last 3 years, and not brand new 3 years ago, but a lot more normal then. So yeah, when it comes to the pickiness, that's not the word you use, but when you have power in the job you are looking for, you get a lot more at your disposal. And so, yeah.
Keeping with the subject of data, I mean, what are some of the really obvious correlations you see when you're surveying to get information on work-life balance?
Yeah.
And what's maybe a correlation that might be a surprise to us?
In terms of the first, I would actually reference, and I'm going to go to Gallup just as an industry leader when it comes to these things. They put out a study in 2021 that looked at the generational differences. And so they looked at Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, and Boomer, those four. When we looked at Boomers and Gen X, they're looking for ethical leadership. That's top on the priority list. If I want to work for this company, this is something that's kind of a must for me. I want to know that I'm following someone who leads well and is ethical in their pursuits.
And ethical would also mean aligns with my morals and my views.
I don't think that's as much true. I mean, that might be a whole other conversation. I think it's more about value alignment and are they who they say they are?
Like trustworthy.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Not as much on the moral or maybe, even the political ends that we see more recently. Now, that was still a top 3 issue, or top 3 desire for the younger the millennials and Gen Z. But above that was that the employer values their well-being as a person. So that's actually above the desire to follow ethical leadership is the organization going to take care of me? Now, within that, there's a lot there. I mean, there's the financial well-being. There's some of those considerations that are more physical or we're used to seeing in the job place. But they're saying, no, I want my employer to care about my mental health. I want my employer to care about my emotional well-being.
Yeah.
I want relational focus at work. And so that may or may not be surprising to some. I think we see those trends in younger generations, but that has really stuck to me or stuck with me over the last couple of years since that study came out. And I think it's really pertinent to the work-life balance conversation.
No, that makes a whole lot of sense. Are there studies or findings that have come out that you think most people would be surprised by some of these findings?
One thing that has been surprising to me in this work-life balance conversation is that the move to remote for some industries has not been all positive.
Sure.
So when we think about balance, we think about the time allotment. We're like, well, gosh, you're at home. You don't have to commute. You don't have to spend money for lunch. If something comes up, we know you can handle it. And so there's this notion that it can only be a positive thing. But early on, and this was something that started to come out right in the middle of the COVID, was this idea, this notion that it actually can create more stress and worse work-life balance for some of those that are fully remote or hybrid.
Sure.
And you
Is
could
that
probably
an
guess,
isolation thing, or?
I think it's a lack of they've not had to create those type of boundaries that they have. So I have my island this is a real personal example for me. A year into working from home, kids would go to school. My wife's a teacher. She would leave. I'd set my laptop on the island and I'd work. It's a peninsula technically, up in my kitchen. Kids get home, close the laptop, and give them hugs. We do dinner, do all the family things. If I have a few minutes, the kids going to get a bath. I pop the laptop open, answer a couple of emails, close it back up. What I found, or what my wife pointed out, was that I was doing that a lot. She said, I know you're not working, but you're kind of always working. And so we can't do that with our phone, but with my laptop there, and that was my office, my kitchen was my office, it was really hard for me to distinguish those boundaries.
Sure.
So it's a personal example of something that I think people found out that, oh, good Lord, I need to, I need to find my own boundaries that I've never had to make before.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about that. So one thing I think is really interesting is the work-life balance conversation can change depending on your level of job satisfaction, right? So if you hate your work or your spouse maybe doesn't support your line of work, for example, there can be additional need to kind of compartmentalize. And that is probably much more difficult in work from home environments.
Oh yeah, that exactly the way you phrased it was great. That compartmentalization. I don't think people assume that you need to do that.
Yeah,
you assume that those things will happen naturally, like they have when you're at the office.
Sure,
right.
Sure.
Those are geographical triggers. You walk out the door, you're in your car. There's transitions. It's like you used to have a 30-minute drive home to transition away from work, and it's now you have a 3-second walk up the stairs.
Yeah,
potentially that it's not much of a transition.
You have to get in your car and drive around the block and then, do that mental shift.
Yeah.
Maybe we should recommend that.
One of the questions that I hear all the time is there such thing as work-life balance? And I think we're alluding to some principles here, but is balance the right word? That seems to me that it implies when one is up, the other one has to be down. Yeah. And what I've always tried to coach that I think there can be a +1 in at work, and there simultaneously can be a +1 in your personal life. I guess, is balance the right word, or do you think there's an integration there? I mean, what are some thoughts there?
I think it doesn't have to be, pitting one against the other. I know for myself, when I'm pretty fulfilled at work and what I'm getting to do, or what I feel like I'm impacting my effectiveness, I bring a better person of me home. And the reverse is true. When things are, frustrating or I'm feeling extra stress, certainly I bring a harsher version of me.
I do think the word is interesting. I mean, balance has been the word we've used to describe that. And the more I think about it, the balance part does work with the time aspect of work-life balance, right? Because time is a finite thing. If you're not at work, you are at home mostly.
Sure.
And that, I think, does teeter. And that's the image you get, the teetering, right?
There's never more than 24 hours in a day, no matter what.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So you can give up things, but ultimately you can't create time. So in that sense, the balance word makes sense. But even then, I personally don't think that work-life balance is only about time.
Definitely.
So that's one variable, and it might be the most important variable, but it's not the only one. We have to think about the mental stress that we endure, and how, like you said, having a bad day at work and how that affects home, and likewise home affecting work. But it's not a balance in that if I'm alleviated from stress at work and I have a highly purposeful role and I'm very successful and therefore satisfied and engaged, I come home and all of that stress is removed. In fact, I'm maybe in a better state of mind than I would be at another place of employment. So that's not a teetering conversation or concept anymore, right? The time might be. So yeah, I like integration. I still like balance for some conversations too. So I don't know if there's a magic word that replaces that.
Sure.
I don't know. I would ask you too. I mean, what do you think, even within different industries or jobs, like maybe heavier on blue collar, or, in a job where someone's like, I'm very much just care for the paycheck. I hate it here, but I'm going to keep working here because I get, I make good money. To that person, is it more balanced in integration? I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely think a huge role, a huge portion of this comes down to job satisfaction. Am I feeling fulfilled, and am I in the right job? Do I hate my job? This is all these factors, I think, play a big role. But I like how you highlighted time is an aspect, mental and physical demand is another aspect, certainly. What other aspects do you look for when you're coaching, when the data suggests could be an imbalance? What's another one there?
Yeah, I would say, so there was a study in 2021, not from Gallup, it was a private study. And what they did is they were looking more at blue collar. So this was specifically blue collar. I think it applies elsewhere. And they looked for the variables that all lead to burnout, essentially, or an imbalance on the work-life piece. So time was the first primary input. Just after that was looking at how does time impact that mental load or that stress, and the play that has on home versus professional, and what Scott was mentioning, how they can kind of mess with each other, right? But the most interesting thing to me, and what I think is one of the primary factors that we don't think about, is perceived success. So if I'm working my butt off and I put in a 60-hour week, and then things start to go downhill from there, and I have that negative stress load home and personal, and they play off each other, eventually, and this is especially true for high performers, eventually you stop feeling successful. And I think that's the point of burnout, that we don't talk about it because by that time it's too late. If I don't feel successful at home and my spouse and my kids are disappointed, whether they say that or not, right? But I know, we know.
Yep.
And if my boss is disappointed, and they probably will tell you, that's a place where you think this is not worth it.
Totally.
We didn't think that when we were just working long hours. Like, we can work long hours.
Yeah.
We can work hard, right?
Yeah.
We can take a little stress here and there. But it's that third factor that, do we feel successful? And so I'm working with a company now out of Pennsylvania, and we ran a campaign, an employee assessment, employee experience campaign, and we worked this into there. We had 8 questions around this conversation. We got real deep into it, and we touched on that success part. Like, we're asking people at work, do you feel successful at home? We also asked if they feel successful at work. We said, do you feel successful at home?
Yeah.
And it may sound like a weird question for a boss to ask, or your employer to ask, but that's the most interesting piece for me.
Yeah.
When you see a team, a group of people, say we see a trend, it's like, well, gosh, all our Gen Zers aren't feeling success outside of work. There's something there.
Yeah.
There's something we need to figure out.
Well,
right?
we were talking a little bit earlier about surprising correlations. I would say that certainly strikes me as a surprising correlation, that someone's success at home carries over into this general topic. But it makes perfect sense that it would.
Yeah.
Completely. I've worked with lots of people that you could see a tail off in their work performance, and as you dove into it deeper, something was going on at home. Maybe they had a wayward kid, could be a multitude of different things, but to see it roll back into what was normally a pretty effective worker be impacted by what's going on at home is a completely normal thing.
Yeah.
Can I ask, I'm thinking of a question for you, Michael. So you run a business, you're responsible for how many people at this point?
I think we're up to 60.
So 60 people. I mean, that's not insignificant. Let's say that one of those employees is in the middle of that, right? Whatever it would be.
Sure.
Home turmoil of some sort.
Sure.
What responsibility? I mean, that's what I hear a lot of leaders say. Well, that's not my responsibility.
Right.
Whatever goes on at home, that's up to you. Figure that out.
Yeah.
As an employer, do you feel,
yeah.
What comes to mind when that happens?
Yeah, this is such a great question. The question I was just teeing up is, whose responsibility is the work-life balance conversation, the employer or the employee? And so I think those are related questions, but ultimately it is a responsibility of the employee. However, I feel called as an employer to come alongside people that are in that point in time to coach them on, listen, family first. There's work can oftentimes wait. It can take a back seat. There's very important things. You're not going to have a redo on your marriage. There's just so many aspects that need to take a priority. So I don't feel necessarily an obligation to always accommodate external life circumstances, but I feel called to do so when possible. And Scott, you've coached me a lot on this topic. Maybe you can comment further.
Yeah, I think, a company has to decide how they are going to handle those things, because it can be really easy to just kind of be corporate and just say, like you said, Dustin, hey, you got to figure this out, but I need you here tomorrow at 8, ready to go and ready to work. And I think what's been neat about the culture that we're really trying to promote is really coming alongside employees and just saying, hey, what is going on? Take the time you need, and how can we assist and come alongside and help you? And a lot of times it is just giving them that break from the work and things like that. But it's been neat to see employees rally around, people in those times of need. We had a guy who had a house fire and, ended up losing his home. And man, because of the relationships that were there and people caring, they leaned in pretty quickly.
Oh, real quick. And I think a big piece of it comes back to our mission, right? Our mission statement is to honor God, enrich lives, and empower people to achieve more. And you can't fulfill that if you're not willing to lean in certain circumstances.
Completely.
And I think actually one of the things I've really enjoyed about some of the growth we've experienced and the number of people on the team now is additional opportunities to lean in ways that otherwise, would be challenging.
Yeah, because I think when people see that model for the first time, it just propels itself. People are like, oh, we can actually do that here? Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to the question, Dustin, I want to ask you this. If you're consulting with the client and they ask you, work-life balance, my responsibility or the employee's responsibility? Obviously, we just talked about a little bit of that, but how would you address that question?
I like where you're starting off, that ultimately it does land on the employee. I mean, outside of work, we can't take responsibility for other people's actions or mindsets. So I think that's a good place to start, that it ultimately does land on the employee. However, I think there's a lot of things a business and leaders can do. And you've provided a few examples that are really encouraging for me to hear, being a business close to where I live. I think one of the first things leaders need to do is acknowledge this whole concept, acknowledge the fact that work-life balance isn't just about time, acknowledge the fact that there are whole people, themselves included in that, right? Well, we talked Monday about, what does it look like for a leader to discuss their home life and hobbies? And I'm not saying spill dirty laundry or gossip or those things, but to share their whole selves and say, hey, here are my plans for the weekend. Hey, I'm taking 2 days vacation. Don't email me. Don't call me. Like, I'm going to be focused on my family. I'm going to be fishing with my dad, whatever that would be. And being as vocal as we can, as opposed to maybe always talking about being busy, always talking about having a full schedule, just encouraging that whole self conversation and making an environment where people can celebrate PTO. I mean, I've been a part of businesses that, like, taking PTO you get a little tiny badge of shame. It's like, and jokingly, right?
Yeah,
You'll walk in,
right.
it's like,
You're
hey,
right. Yeah.
hey, how was the 3-day weekend? That must be nice.
Yeah.
Like, well, we jab at each other, but what you're doing there is you're creating a culture or allowing a culture that says resting is not okay.
Right.
Whereas if you take that and say, hey, I hope you have a fantastic long weekend. Like, no email, make sure to stay off text, email, all that stuff. Let me know how it goes when you're in Monday. I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah, no doubt.
Those are two different conversations, and it may sound like a minor difference, but again, what culture are you creating around that? So I feel like I could go on for a while, but
Sure,
I think that's a big piece of it.
A young leader, Scott, I'll start with you here. Just talk to me a little bit about conversations you've had with a young leader or people getting started, new business, and they kind of assume that work-life balance is going to be trash. That's kind of the expectation. Let's say an entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur. How would you coach them on looking at it from a different perspective? I know you've really helped me look at it as what other people have done. It doesn't need to impact how you approach this subject.
Completely.
So, what advice would you give somebody who's predetermined that they're going to have to throw this away?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, Michael, there aren't a lot of great examples out there of people that have done it in a healthy way, started companies, started their career, and really stuck to that. But I think what I've seen is that when people are willing to say, hey, you know what? You hired me to do this role. I'm going to give you a good effort. I'm going to work hard in the time that we've talked about. But, after that, with a few exceptions, I've got a private life too. I can remember coming to a point early in my career at Biomet where I'd been there a couple years, so I'd run hard those first couple years, really wanted to show them what I could do, prove myself. And then I backed down to what was a reasonable pace, which was probably still about 50 hours. And I remember on my annual review, my boss said, hey, it seems like you've kind of slowed down. And I'm like, well, am I still delivering results? And he said, yeah, absolutely. But this was a guy that was driving an hour each way to work and put in probably no less than 70 hours a week.
Sure.
So I knew I was potentially cutting my head off by saying, you know what? I actually have some things outside of work that are really important to me.
Yeah.
My family, my church involvement. And I said, I'll still work hard for you. I know we got exceptions where I got to come in on the weekend, but here's the line I'm setting. And I think what it did for me was it gave me the confidence to say, hey, you can still be an achiever and hit some of those goals, but also stand up for your family, stand up for, that personal life.
We've talked a lot about work-life balance is not just about time. An hour spent at work is an hour not at home. Therefore, there's an imbalance. There's a lot of other factors. Where do most businesses get their response to work-life balance wrong?
I think one of the places they get it wrong, and Dustin was kind of alluding to it earlier, I think it's really not taking time to value them as a person. It's like you just see them as this commodity that it's like, oh man, I hired this awesome accountant, and there's this scarcity mentality that, man, if they don't really grind it out for me, then I'm losing out on, what I'm paying them and things like that, as opposed to realizing, man, do you realize over time, a happily engaged person at home and in work is actually going to run through the walls for you if they know they're valued and they're cared for. And I just think those soft skills have kind of been scoffed at in the past, and I think they're really starting to come into play and realize that, man, if we want healthy, engaged employees, like we got to treat them like people, not just commodities.
No, you're right. It seems so basic, but it's probably an exception.
Yeah.
Certainly in certain industries, I would think. Yeah.
One thing I've heard, and this is not from any business in particular, but I do think the conversation's going around that this whole like engagement, satisfaction, work-life balance piece, it's for younger folk.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
And and it's kind of written off, maybe not entirely written off, but it's like, well, for our Gen Xers and the people who've been around the block a while, they don't care. They don't care about this. But we might need to make the young ones happy. And like that's kind of how, and it's almost dismissed and or diminished at least, right? Sure, because it's a young person thing. And honestly, I don't even know. Like I just talked about the difference between the two from that Gallup study. So maybe there is a difference there. The reality is that right now I think millennials and Gen Z make up just under 50% together. Gen Z is going to take over in the next, like it'll only get larger from here, right? And so their philosophy and desire from the workplace is going to overtake the market. It has to. Because people get older, and unless we figure out a way to stop aging, we're going to replace the workforce. And so I think, regardless of why, rather than diminish, I think it's time to accept that younger employees want the company to care about their well-being.
Sure.
I think a lot of them value time more than money.
Absolutely, and experience.
Yeah. They want to be mentored. They want these things. So I know this isn't a Gen Z conversation, but I think it has started to drive this to the top of the conversation, and I think it's time to listen.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that shift from, kind of that big pendulum shift from work ethic to, experience. I think older folks feel like it's an exclusive thing and that they're at odds with each other as opposed to trying to, kind of integrate the two.
Agreed.
Because I think at some point, and probably already, there's a little bit of conversation that has to be had sometimes with younger folks that, hey, it isn't all about the experience and there's some work to be done here and we actually got to focus here and get some work done. We're going to have some fun stuff too, but let's get some stuff done first.
Yes.
And I think technology has changed so much that it's really led to very different conversation among different generations too. I remember, I'll tell you a funny story. My dad used to leave these really long voicemails, the business voicemails back in the day. And he would get through this huge script and he'd mess up and he'd hit a button to re-record the voicemail. So he would do like 10 or 15 voicemails and he'd finally get it right. Today, that would be us on our phone, emailing or texting or, working on Teams or Slack or what have you. And it's all instant and it's all right there, no matter what the time zone is, no matter where the client is. That's a different factor that plays into work-life balance. I guess, is there when you look at the data, is there data that suggests technology plays a role in creating imbalance with work-life balance?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we've already kind of covered the hybrid remote, although I think that those technological advances have really sped things up. But yeah, I think of one story in particular that comes to mind was working with an executive who was coming across as overbearing and his team was burnout. And he told me, he said, listen, Dustin, so this was in a one-on-one. He said, listen, Dustin, I don't get it. Like, I'm a high achiever. I hired all high achievers. I'm blown away that they are burnout because I feel like I expect the same thing from them I always have. And so we started talking about his communication to them, talking about the technology piece. And he said, he's like, well, yeah, like, I do my best. Like I leave, I go home and then I bang out all my emails from 7 to 9 PM, sometimes a little later than that. It's like, that's just when I'm alive. I'm thriving at night. And I said, is the rest of your team like that too? And he said, I don't know. Like sometimes they email back, yeah, but sometimes it's the next day. I said, okay, but you're subjecting them to your power hours of 7 to 9. Do you know if that's their power hours too? And so we started talking about that and how even email, just a simple, which isn't a new thing. Yeah. But I think hybrid remote, again, talking about the change in boundaries, applying his workload or his ideal time to his employees was creating an environment where his team felt like they always had to be on.
Yeah.
Some of them have young families, right? Some of them coach. Some of them have, church membership stuff. And they're getting these email tags from someone who they want to be like. They want to, not just to be promoted or anything, but they follow this person and they care about him and they want to be like him. And so if he's setting the bar for excellence, and this simple, great technology of email has freed us up to communicate whenever, whoever, wherever we want, whenever. And it's become a detriment. So that's not exactly data. That was more anecdotal from my experience, but.
And Scott, how would you coach a young leader? Somebody comes to them and says, "Hey, do I need to have email notifications? Do I need to enable these things?" What would you walk them through?
Yeah, I think it's a healthy expectation conversation, with your manager, your supervisor, of just saying, "Hey, I'm okay if you email me. Let's just set what the rules are."
Yeah.
Are you expecting me to reply, or is this you're just getting them out of your inbox and you're fine with me replying first thing in the morning? I think that's where the unknown and the stress can kind of come in. Is it's like, oh, am I supposed to respond right now, or is this something that can wait?
Sure. Yeah. Coaching them on urgency, I think, is
absolutely
is really critical.
Absolutely. I think another big concept in this whole conversation is really, when you start looking at it from just a healthy individual, is when is that employee unplugging? Because I thought of it when you talked about the technology piece. In some ways, it's awesome, but there's some real downsides to it. That, man, I can be doing a little bit of work all day long until I put my phone away.
Total inability to disconnect.
Yes,
from time to time.
yes.
Yeah.
I think that's even more prevalent with younger, depending on who you are. Lack of boundaries.
Sure.
The kind of, I think there's addiction with technology.
There is, definitely.
Not me, not
of
us.
Course not
other
you.
people.
Yeah, I think the other thing that technology does is, you already referenced it. It speeds up, but also the context shifting that you do. You think about the context shifting that a typical 8-hour day holds compared to 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
I talked to some of my friends that, are still farmers and things like that. And that's part of what I think they love about being in that environment, is they can run at 40 miles an hour all day long.
Yeah.
Now, they work some long hours.
Absolutely.
But the pace is slower. And they love that.
Well,
and
it's focused.
Man, I think it's great.
Very focused. Yeah. Makes sense. One of the topics I wanted to talk about today, and I mean this both for an organization as well as an individual. We've talked about what work-life balance is. We've even questioned, is balance the right word? We've talked about it. It's way more than just time. What are some of the symptoms or outcomes that we've all observed with organizations and people that are not getting it right?
I think employers and employees alike want to create a conversation of like, how do we progress you? How do we progress you? How do we progress you? And that can be a really healthy, great thing, a really positive thing for the business, for the individual. But I think at what cost sometimes is what comes to mind. And I don't know. I guess I think that it's going to come at the expense of the employee.
Sure. In my personal life, Scott, you'd get a kick out of this. I notice that things are a little bit off when I really struggle to be decisive at home. Because what it means to me is I got too much jam-packed in there. I'm a very decisive person generally. And when I can't be decisive at home, it makes me think, okay, something's out of balance. And I'm not operating the way I usually operate. Maybe you could comment on something personal, or what are outcomes that would indicate a business really needs to evaluate this too?
Yeah, I think for me, the way I like to coach people and certainly even hold myself accountable is, what are the roles? What are the God-given roles God's given you at this season of life? Every one of us around the table is a husband, we're a father, and then we're a worker at our business. And I think, you ask what are some of the indicators of this not going well? And I would say it's when you don't feel like you're really succeeding or fulfilling those other roles.
Oh, sure.
And it can be lots of things. Sometimes it isn't necessarily always a work or a number of hours you're working, but often it can be. I know early on when I was way out of bounds with things, Julie would just say, hey, you're home, but you're not really home. You're not present, with me, and the kids are talking to you, and you're on your phone or you're answering emails.
That seems like it could be a dangerous cycle, because if you're not there at home and there's frustration, there could be temptation to give work more,
Completely.
right? And then how do you get out of that cycle?
Yeah, because then you're getting kind of the complaining and the nagging at home, and yet if you're succeeding at work, you're getting the kudos and the attaboys, and
the
so
adrenaline.
It just drives you, further in that. And so I think it is being able to have healthy conversations with people and just saying, back to what you said, Dustin, we're people, and we want you to succeed in the whole realm of your life, not just here, in the role we've given you at work. And so what can we do to kind of help you? And a lot of times we're just asking the questions. It really is, up to the employee to do some of those things. But I think to be able to lean in and actually acknowledge, hey, this is a struggle for all of us. This isn't unique that you're facing. It's all of us. And we care about this. We want to help you fix it.
Sure.
Man, when you were sharing that, I was kind of going back to early in my career. I was in education. I worked for the Crossing Education Center, and we ran a campus in Ep2, and there's a lot of kids that would come through that we wanted to give them the attention and love and care they deserved, and they needed it. This is a safety net school below the safety net, and so it was the last chance for a lot of these high school kids. And at that time, when I started, I didn't have any children yet. So I have 4 now. But I remember the year that I had my child, and every day after school, I was staying after. I was like tutoring kids. I was hanging out, playing football with them, whatever, dinner. We poured into those kids. We tracked our hours, hundreds of thousands of hours with these kids. And I remember even after I had my child, I thought, well, he's fine. Like, this is fine. He's just a baby. And I was focused on this problem, not just for the kudos, but like, I'm solving a problem, or I'm trying, I'm doing something meaningful. And then I go home and it's just, a crying baby.
Yep.
And I remember times thinking like, this doesn't feel like impact right here.
Right.
Like, but when I go to work tomorrow, it's going to be impact, and I'll know the impact. And so I think I like to see myself as a high achiever, high performer, and always striving for that next problem to solve. And it got me in trouble too. Right. Like, not prioritizing things. And it made me even wonder, as we're talking about this, that if this work-life balance thing, I wonder if it's mostly a problem for higher performing people.
Yeah.
Those that are always striving for that next problem to fix, for that next barrier to jump over, right? I don't know if lazy people, maybe for a different reason, struggle with some of that success, right?
Sure.
But this specific thing we're talking about today feels like those that are going to push. And if you ask them, if I say like, hey, he's reliable, like I'm going to call him at 6 because I got a problem with the client and I need it solved right now. I'm going to call my guy. I'm going to call my girl who I know will get it done.
No, I think that's a really interesting topic. And, one of the reasons I think high performers do struggle with this in particular is, there's big decisions to be made. There's big decisions to be made in business. There's big sales. There's, there can be kind of an addiction to that rush that you can get at work that you can't easily replicate at home. And to go back to that conversation, if you're not feeling very fulfilled at home, it's easy to look forward to that next rush, right?
Oh,
and
totally.
I think that that people are glued to their phones, people are glued to email, and it's that next rush is part of that conversation. I think that's definitely something really prevalent today that is really magnified with the tech and everything else.
Yeah, I think, to your point, Dustin, I think I've heard people over the years go, man, how does that guy, why is he so driven to work, all these hours or things like that? And I'm like, well, he's got little ones at home. It's much easier to like stay in the office and, crank out some work and, like you said, get that rush than to go home and just be, faithful dad and give your wife a break. And, those are mundane things, but super important.
Scott, one of the things that you've brought to the table at Winona IT that's really been very valuable is you've helped coach our leadership on identifying some imbalance in the workplace and how to correct it. And one of the things that I thought was really important is every now and then when this becomes a major issue, it's worth a company-wide evaluation. Do we have capacity? Do we have the right people in the right seats? What are some other things you might tell businesses to look into if they're feeling like this is a problem and don't know where to even start?
Yeah, I would say it's probably another step back from that, because what you're talking about is really having trust that you're going to get accurate feedback and answers. And so you really have to build some relationship and trust first. But once you have that established, I think being able to hit the pause button, and sometimes it's off of a busy season, it's kind of an ideal time of just saying, wow, that project was super intense. Like, are you guys tired? I'm tired. And really just being honest that, man, this has been stressful and hectic. And hitting the time out, being human, and then just really asking, the questions like, hey, what could we have done differently to maybe have navigated this season to, make this, in the moment, everything seems so urgent. It's got to be done today. We're going to lose this client, whatever. And then you get, a few months down the road and you're like, man, it wasn't quite as mission critical as I thought it was. Yeah. And so I think to just open that dialogue up and say, you know what, hey, we want to learn from this. So the next time we run into this, maybe we can get a little bit better and have a better pace for the whole thing.
Yeah. That's really good. I think one thing that comes to mind is that, so the nerd comment in me, but in my opinion, you have to make things objective. So when it comes to a conversation like this, or really anything around the culture piece, what a lot of leaders do, and this isn't necessarily bad, but they have the same few people that are talking in their ears, and that's what informs their view of how the business is doing. And maybe even when you're small, that's something that's, you have 10, 20, maybe 30 people, you might be close enough to the bottom where you can have a pretty good beat on it. As you grow, and I don't know what that magic number is, but it becomes difficult to get the consensus of the business accurately.
Sure.
And that's where I think, so what I do for businesses is help kind of build cultural KPIs for them, because we have KPIs for all the operational side of the business, and we make decisions based on that, right? It's like, this affects the bottom line negatively, we don't do it. But with people decisions, we just kind of make them based on our gut. We're trying to be altruistic, we're trying to be considerate, but again, it's just a subjective opinion. And so I think you have to have some objectivity around this conversation. And so whether that's building on an index and assessing your employees quarterly, there's 100 ways to do it, but I think it needs to be objective.
Is Gallup an option out there, or are there plenty of holes in that?
I don't know if there's holes in it. I mean, there are so many assessments. There's so many canned assessments out there, we wouldn't even have the time to go through and say which one of these is valid for this conversation or not. My stance and why I created my business and started my practice is that every single business is unique. So rather than use something canned for the sake of a benchmark, which is good to see where we land, ultimately with every business being unique, we have to ask the right questions. We have to ask it in the right way at the right time. And if we want to get a metric around our people and culture, it can't be something that someone else is using. And that's my opinion. I mean, there's a lot of value in those other tools, but when I work with clients, I build something for them because I want them to know what it is, what it means, so they can make decisions based off of it. Yeah. Similar to how they would with other KPIs.
Totally agree with your methodology there. I've always thought that there was a lot to be desired from some of those canned surveys. I really want to give people listening that are struggling with this topic. Let's say, for example, somebody feeling a lot of burnout right now. What are the next steps? I mean, I know it varies so much depending on why they're feeling burned out, but somebody listening, they're struggling. What can be done?
Yeah, I think, one thing would just be to try to get them to unplug. A lot of times it's going to be over a weekend, but get some place where you can get kind of some clear headspace and really just start, asking yourself some questions. What is it that's causing this burnout in me? Is it a bad fit? Am I being asked to do something that really isn't fit me? Sometimes it's that. Is the pace at which I'm having to do stuff, it's just too much, too fast? It could be some of those kinds of things. Maybe there's a personal issue going on that is, causing some stress and it's bleeding into the burnout that I'm feeling. I think it's really trying to get to the root of that. I think the other thing I would say after you spend kind of some time by yourself, I would say, man, get somebody across the table from you that knows you pretty well,
Sure,
and that
sure.
can really just kind of ask you some questions, that cares about you, and,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. And I think between those two, you're probably going to unearth a good starting point.
I was going there. That was one of the two things that came to mind for me, is just mentorship from someone who holistically, hopefully, even knows your family.
Yeah.
My primary mentor, and I have a few, is someone we sit down and the first thing he asks about is my wife.
Nice.
Then he asks about my kids. Then he asks about my work. And certainly we might
Sounds
end
like
up,
somebody I know.
we still might end up talking more about work, but he's not going to miss those beats in the conversation. So yeah, every single person, I don't care how low in the totem pole you are and what business you work for, get a mentor.
Completely.
And then I would say, we've had a few points in here talking about how spouses or people in our lives that eventually tell us that, hey, there's an imbalance. Something's wrong. I would say, even if that conversation hasn't happened, get ahead of it.
Yeah.
Sure,
Sit down with
sure.
your partner. And if you're not married and you still feel like this is a concern, sit down with a good friend or a roommate and say, listen, I'm trying to understand if I'm in the right spot. You're one of the primary people who gets the negative effects of me not being in a good spot. So how am I doing? And what boundaries do you think would be good to set up? So if I'm working from home, my wife and I have now had that conversation, but she started that with me. So, right, if I had initiated and noticed that earlier, we could have avoided some tough conversations and some headaches and some, stressful nights. So I would say just being honest with yourself, and I guess all of these suggestions have fallen under the same asking for help.
Yeah.
It's hard to recognize your own demise. It's a really strong word for right now, right? But it's hard to recognize those things in ourselves. So
sure.
get an outside opinion.
Yeah.
Be humble enough to open yourself up to change. And you said this earlier, you will get that meeting back at work if you miss it.
Completely.
I'm not talking about just skipping out on meaningful projects or anything like that, but those things, you'll get another chance in those. You do not get another chance. If I missed a soccer game, I missed the soccer game, right? Yeah. If I missed a date night or if I was distracted by my phone, I've lost that opportunity. But there will be other projects, there will be other jobs, there will be redos and the professional side of things. And so, yeah.
Dustin, again, I just wanted to thank you for joining us today, especially on such short notice. Really, really appreciate it. How can the folks get a hold of you? Give us one more reminder.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Easiest way to reach out to me is caliberconsulting.org. In the upper right, there's a chance to book time with me. What I'm looking for is to build relationships just like we are here, have conversations just like we are here with businesses who care about their people. So if that's you, you can find me on that website.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I also really want to thank Dream On Studios again for hosting us. Really, really appreciate it. This is a world-class studio. If you haven't checked out Dream On Studios, please do. It's incredible. Thank you so much. Folks, we're going to have a section on our website and social media here real soon, winonaIT.com, where you'll be able to submit a topic that you would like to hear about, and we're going to go through several of those over the next few weeks. So really looking forward to it. Tech, business, life. We're open to pretty much anything at this point. So let us know your suggestions, and thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it.